Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We're going to give everyone 2 minutes to take virtual seats. We are delighted to welcome you today. I love watching the numbers climb. Thank you for being a part of day 3 of International Women's Week.
There's been so many really interesting events, Sonia, that it's available for everyone. And this is really 12 days of celebration, and not just for women, but for all. And really a lot of really interesting events that are happening. And of course, today we're really talking about cybersecurity. Not just in terms of an interesting platform, but something that is so necessary given all the challenges and opportunities that are being faced.
Absolutely. Inspiration and actionable insight today. That is what we will deliver. We're going to give everyone just one more moment to take virtual seats. I see the numbers climbing, and then we will launch our program. All right, to respect everyone's time, we will move forward with the amazing program we have assembled today. Good afternoon, bonjour tout le monde. It is an honor to welcome you today to day 3 of International Women's Week, Women Leading Globally in Cybersecurity, Breaking Barriers, Boundaries, and Billion-Dollar Markets. It's an honor for Invest Ottawa to join our friends and partners at the University of Ottawa for today's session. And before we begin, we would love to invite Rita Alma, our Diversity and Inclusion Strategist and Lead at Invest Ottawa and Bayview Yards, to come forward and deliver our land acknowledgement to begin today's session. Thank you, Rita.
Thanks, Sonia. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me. As we're coming together today for the purpose of building and supporting women's leadership and entrepreneurship, it's important to approach this project with meaning and intention. This is why I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our work and the organization's presence on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Unceded means that these lands, which we now call Ottawa, were never signed away by the Anishinaabe people who inhabited them before Europeans settled in North America. In other words, this land was stolen. I'm raising this as part of a personal commitment to truth and reconciliation, knowing that the first step is to admit the truth and that Indigenous leaders have been calling on non-Indigenous voices to help do so. The truth also means acknowledging the ways in which colonization and its effects are gendered, as evidenced by the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women in both Canada and the United States, for example. Second, we acknowledge that the Algonquin Anishinaabe people are still here. Part of the intentions and effects of colonization are to erase the existence of Indigenous peoples, and we do this land acknowledgement to counter that force of erasure. Lastly, I'd like to call attention to another of colonization's effects, the intentional separation and marginalization of Indigenous people, which has meant that most settlers have little to no connections to Indigenous communities and knowledges. Being systematically separated from a whole group of people and a critical body of knowledge, especially in the time of climate emergency, is and continues to be a huge loss and poses a growing risk to our collective future. I'd love to ask us now to take a minute to scan your personal and professional circles. Ask yourself, who's missing? And how can I build meaningful connections with Indigenous peoples close to me and take just one action in the next week to reverse the damage and separation that colonization has caused? Let's pause for a moment of silence here to reflect on that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rita, and for all of your invaluable contributions to Invest Ottawa and the community we serve. 4 million. This is the number of cybersecurity professionals required around the world. With 2 million highly skilled people currently employed internationally in cybersecurity, there is a growing labor shortage in this critical field. This gap is widening with the global pandemic. And it's not simply a labor gap, it's a gender and diversity gap. Research shows that women currently make up approximately 20% of the global cybersecurity workforce, and this is a risk that threatens our long-term competitiveness, prosperity, and security as a global society. And this is what we are here to discuss and to address today as a collaborative community. We are so honored to have such incredible and dynamic leaders with us for an insightful afternoon of inspiration and actionable insight on the current state of cybersecurity in terms of opportunities, challenges, seismic events, and big ideas. That 4 million labor gap. We'll look at strategies to address this labor gap with the lens of gender and diversity, how to attract, develop, and retain top women to the cybersecurity field, and conclude with a hands-on training session delivered by leaders at Fortinet. We could not be more honored to welcome so many experts from across our region, from across Canada, and around the world to this session today. Let's kickstart this with our keynote panel and bring forward my good friend, fellow leader, our moderator, Sophia Leong, Executive Lead Development and International Relations from the University of Ottawa. Sophia, over to you.
Thank you so very much, Sonia. Look at the beautiful faces, powerful women, but also at the same time, incredibly fun women to work with. Look, we live in the VUCA world, right? So what does that mean? It's a world of volatility. It's a world of uncertainty. It's a world of complexity, and it's a world of ambiguity. So we're so fortunate to have this incredible panel of keynote panelists. Beautiful Claudette McGovern. I mean, everything that you touch is incredible. And I think you just won another award. You might want to share that with us later on. And of course, you come from TD. You're the Global Exec Officer in terms of cyber experience. Sandra, thank you so much for spending the next 40 minutes with us. Really appreciate Sandra comes from Fortinet. She's the SVP in terms of marketing and threat intelligence. And Sam, thank you so much for beaming in. I know you're in between events, so your contribution is really, really appreciative. And of course, Sam is president and co-founder of MXF. So one of the things that we really want to talk about is the world that we're in. Do a really quick situational analysis, especially when we're talking about cybersecurity, touch on the opportunity and threat based on the digital transformation. And of course, because of COVID, it absolutely accelerated remote working and learning and an increased reliance in global connectivity. And all of that, and given the legacy system that we have on increasing complexity in the system, it opens up incredible risk. And I think all of us realize, and I've heard many stories about hacks and cyber threats. And in fact, a lot of data gathering organizations mentioned that because of COVID, this is really a perfect storm for hackers. So we'd really love to have a good situation analysis, but also at the same time to hear more about you. We want to hear about you, how you get to where you are, what keeps you interested, but also share your pathway and your journey with our participants. But also at the same time too, share in terms of what is keeping you up awake, right? I did share a few questions with you previously. I'm very mindful of time. So for the next 40 minutes, we're going to talk about really fundamentally 4 questions. I'm going to try to make sure that we have good perspective from each one of you. And also mindful that Sam has to drop off at 1:50, so Sandra and also Claudette, so we're very mindful of time. With that in mind, I'm gonna start with Claudette. Could you share with us your perspective in terms of where we are, really is the state of union of cybersecurity? If you could really also share in terms of what are the fundamental market shifts or technology shifts, what are some of the seismic events from your perspective that is really occupying your mind share? Claudette, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Sophia, and just thrilled to be here today and to share kind of, the state of the nation. First, let me say that if we're looking for a word to describe the place we're in, I think things like disrupt come to mind, pivot come to mind, and really the unexpected. So we're in this place right now where no day is like the other. And so when I look at this industry, things that top of mind for me, obviously supply chain risk. We know through the SolarWinds event, the art of what's possible. We understand the commitment that threat actors have as far as disrupting, our days, our weeks, our lives in general. And so I think, I'm thinking a lot about all of our partners and how that ecosystem comes together. And some of the things that I'm accountable for relate to intelligence and the need for us to share information as real time as possible, and not just do it from private industry, but private, public, everybody working together to make sure that we have information to do what we need to do to keep ourselves not only connected but protected. I'm also thinking a lot around education. And that's one thing I think we take for granted, is that, everybody has a device. So, 7+ billion people on the earth, 4 billion of them have devices, and we're connected, but are we protected? How do we protect ourselves? What type of education? It can't just be about October and Cyber Awareness Month. So we're doing things, whether it's through our podcast, through our education initiatives, webinars, to engage as many hearts and minds as possible, so that we're not just thinking about organizational protection, but protection at home. Because as you mentioned, we've got more people working at home now than ever before. And so that's more threats, more attack vectors, but also means more people to make sure that they're trained and know what to do.
So Claudette, I want you to hang on to the podcast idea, because I know the fact that you just launched one. When we get to some of the big ideas, I would love for you to share a little bit more. Could you share in terms of which award you won yesterday?
I won the Harry Jerome Award, which is a Canadian word for technology. So it's awarded to 12 Canadians in different categories, one per category. So someone like Jamal Magloire won for athleticism. Then you had other leaders win. Dennis Mitchell, I think, won the President's Award, and I won the award for technology here in Canada.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sam, can I ask you to also share from your perspective through the lens of a State of Union?
Okay, so I'd like to not only look at it from a North American perspective, but also what's happening around the world, because as you know, cybersecurity is connected through the internet. So in terms of some of the, I think, challenges that's happening in North America, obviously, as Claudette had mentioned, the State of the Union, she mentioned the SolarWinds hack, but there's also, I mean, last year we saw a lot come out. There was a Marriott data breach, which impacted over 5 million guests, and that's not, again, just centered in North America. There was also a breach, I think it impacted about 10 billion people. It was an adult entertainment site. The Twitter hack comes to mind, where high profile users were targeted, and that was mainly because of spear phishing. And finally, the MGM data breach as well. That impacted about 10 million guests. Again, it was some of the notable victims were obviously Canadian Justin Bieber and Jack Dorsey from Twitter CEO, US military, government officials. So, and that was due to unauthorized access to cloud servers. So this was pre-COVID. So just for everyone to keep in mind, it takes over 280 days before you actually find out that you've been breached on average. And that's from an enterprise perspective. So if you're a small, medium business that's working with an enterprise, you may not even know. So as Claudette had mentioned, the value chain is so important, and education is so important, especially from a governance perspective. So a lot of organizations that work in North America also have subcontractors, not only in Europe, but also in Asia and in Africa. So it's really important to also ensure that those subcontractors are also educated, they have good cybersecurity governance protocols in place, and also cybersecurity insurance, because without that, if they get breached, you may have a secure system, but everything else could potentially go down. I mean, in Europe alone, I believe last year, stats were coming out. Again, this is what was just reported. Over 52% of EU companies notified of data breaches. And this is in Netherlands ranked #1, then it was followed by Germany, then the UK. Obviously in the US, you know, US is the biggest country that sees a lot of data breaches. And last year alone, IBM reported it was over $8.6 million in losses. So that, again, this is what was reported. So this is not what has not been reported. So it's really important for education and to have good governance protocols and policies in place for the entire value chain, not just for your employees, but from the boards to your C-suite, to your employees and the rest of your subcontractors.
Absolutely, from a governance perspective, right? And also making sure that the hard and the soft infrastructure is solid and accounted for. Sandra, from the lens of Fortinet, what are you seeing? What are you seeing in terms of not just in terms of market shift, technology shift? What are the things that are really giving you the what I call the heebie-jeebies when it comes to cybersecurity? Yeah.
Well, I think everyone would agree that cybersecurity is definitely a key enabler of digital transformation, but it's also an extremely dynamic space. Cybersecurity is constantly changing and really needs to fill in some of the other gaps that we see as technology changes. So I think from a tech, and COVID really reinforced this with the move to remote working and learning. You know, we saw the resurgence of known and unknown threats and new threats, you know, as attackers really look to the home office as a foothold into the enterprise. And so with that, I think, you know, you're seeing the whole landscape change with IoT, the move to the cloud, you know, the landscape of 5 years ago where you had the perimeter that was clearly defined is everywhere today. So, you know, with all of these technology innovations, you've seen the creation of billions of new edges, each with its own perimeter that has to be protected. So we're increasingly seeing the convergence of security and networking to really address this problem, and more organizations moving from best of breed technologies to more of a platform approach to security, where you have a lot more integration and communication and protection across every point of the digital landscape. So that's from a technology perspective, that's how Fortinet is definitely addressing this issue. But we're also seeing that, you know, organizations and security leaders are really continuing to be concerned about the insider attack. That continues to be the #1 way that attackers get into the enterprise. And so we have, you know, at the beginning of COVID, Rob, who's here today, my colleague, his organization rolled out new Infosec training that we provided free to our customers so that employees can become more aware and educated about cyber risk. I think it may have been Claudette talked about, you know, information sharing. That's another area that we're heavily involved in. You know, if you think about cybercrime, less than 1% of cybercrimes are ever solved. And one of the reasons for that is cybercrime doesn't have any borders. You know, you can have a crime is happening in one country, it's being investigated in another country. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of the intelligence in terms of addressing these crimes lie with security vendors. So often law enforcement doesn't have all the tools and intelligence to, you know, solve these crimes. And so it's really important for all of these different organizations and entities to work together. So we're working with the World Economic Forum, with you know, the Cyber Threat Alliance, intelligence organizations, and NATO and Europol to really address, and we're seeing some success there. But I think in terms of the landscape today, I think you need a much more holistic approach, and it's technology, it's education, it's training, and it's information sharing.
It's interesting because one of the things that we talk about in terms of the increasing number of nodes that creates created really a system that is really have open doors for attack, given the connectivity, given the practices and behaviors internal to organization. But also there's incredible market opportunities based on the digital transformation, based on the consuming behavior of individuals working from home. Everyone is connected. We are celebrating the International Women's Week this week. Can I shoot a question to you? And I'm going to go to Claudette first. The less than 20% women participation in cyber is maddening. I think that is a very static number. It hasn't really grown effectively. Absolutely understand the whole piece of education. How does the lack of diversity or lack of women in cybersecurity risk the global security from your perspective? Because not having enough women in the workplace, especially for cybersecurity, is an ism in racism. So Claudette, over to you from your perspective.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And also, I don't know if you guys noticed, but on LinkedIn, when we announced that we were going to have this event, a gentleman, very well-meaning, said, I just want to understand, what's the big deal? Why do you need more women in cyber? How's that going to keep us more protected? And I thought, you know, first of all, it's good that he voiced that, because if he is bold enough to write that online, there are many people who think the same thing. So I think it's a great question that you ask. Us women represent 50% of the world. Let's just think about this. It's a big number. For anything that you're doing, why would you want to leave out 50% of the population? Okay, we have this challenge of 4 million unfilled jobs. You want to get the best and the brightest minds, and I believe some of them happen to be in female bodies. The third point I would highlight, as far as why would you want anybody to be involved in this industry, is that we know that in anything we do, when you bring diversity to the table, whether it's diversity of thought, race, think, like you imagine all this thing, gender, you get better solutions, you get better outcomes, because we are building for everyone. We are protecting everyone. So absolutely, whether it's a business problem, it's a cyber problem, it's a problem at home, I want to have everybody who represents society tackling these issues. So that's how I would have answered that gentleman. Why do we need people here at TD Bank? Because we want the best and the brightest. And that's, I think, the same for every organization. I want to see men and women in this pipeline. I want to be solving problems together. And the most creative groups of people I've seen are these threat actors. They don't sleep. They work meticulously. They've got teams of thousands, millions, you name it, and they are collaborating, and they don't go, hey, let's leave out the women. So let's make sure we bring everybody to the table to solve these difficult problems.
And absolutely right. And I'm so glad you addressed it, because we want to be respectful of everyone's perspective, but also be crystal clear in terms of why we need everyone at the table. Because not only is offering a better solution, it actually reduces biases in the system. So therefore, not in terms of products, services, approaches, and also much healthier conversation. I'm going to switch gear to talk about you. So I'll start with Sandra. Please share with us your journey in terms of into cybersecurity. You have such a rich background and experience, and I think it's important to hear firsthand from each of you your journey. Some are more unconventional than others, and I think it's so important to really have a line of sight to different pathway. So share with us in terms of how did you get to where you are?
Well, the short answer is I happened into cybersecurity. I came to the US about 30 years ago. I came to Silicon Valley, and obviously the no-brainer was to go right into high tech, which I pretty much did. And as I mentioned earlier, I worked in all different, every aspect of high tech I've worked in various roles. But, you know, about several years ago, I was consulting for a company and they asked me to come in and work on a crisis project. And basically they had been hacked. Mm-hmm. And that experience was the most exhilarating, interesting experience I've ever had. I mean, it went on for several months where, you know, we were watching the hackers inside the network. It was just, you know, I was blown away by the talent and the brilliance of the teams working on this. And, you know, with that project, I did a lot more research. And at that point I decided, oh, my next job, you know, it's going to be in cybersecurity. This is just thrilling. It's interesting. It touches everybody. And then Fortinet happened to reach out to me, and I went in and started off really building their communications organization. So that was my background. But what I found was the industry is so rich with opportunity and so many different skill sets applied to it that I very quickly saw that I could move in many different directions and my skill sets applied in so many ways. And so, you know, over time, very quickly, my scope broadened. I took on new roles, new responsibilities. And I would say of any industry, that has been the most dynamic and the most interesting of all. I do think that it's appalling that there's so few women in the industry, especially when you have such a huge problem. And not just women, but, you know, underrepresented groups overall. Like women now make about 20% of the workforce. Underrepresented groups are only about 5% of the workforce. So there's tons of opportunity to tap into these different groups. But I also think, again, Claudette touched on something that I feel strongly about. You know, the hackers, they have diversity. So, I mean, there's all different types of people, different backgrounds. So to have an industry that is it's still very male dominated, it's extremely white, to have, you know, such a narrow force trying to compete against such a broad, diverse group just doesn't make sense. And I think women are very detail oriented. They bring in a lot of creativity. They're very open. And I think without those perspectives, we're missing a lot of opportunity in the industry.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Sam, what's your journey like?
Okay. So it began in 2013. The reason why we started Exahai was my co-founder and I, David Mahajer, also happens to be my husband. We experienced 3 different cyber breaches on 3 different occasions. So prior to working in the federal government, we worked in private sector for many years. And while working in the federal government, we were holding secret and top secret clearance, and we were really concerned that our information was out there. So we decided, okay, let's take the leap and start Exahai and enable secure communications between professionals and their value chain, but make sure it's not like the traditional communication services that's offered out there, because the big differentiator is that when you put encryption keys on the server actually gets breached and then it gets decrypted. So that was my journey. I don't have an IT background, but I took my skill sets and my education towards a cybersecurity governance perspective, looking at policies, regulations, so more from a compliance and privacy aspect as well. So cybersecurity, I mean, for women, I find it doesn't necessarily, or any marginalized communities or anyone in general, doesn't have to be for someone who's pure technical, because that's technical is one component. If you have to have the governance, you have to have the education, you have to have the training, you need a holistic approach in order to combat these ongoing breaches. Because if you don't, and you just focus on amazing, and there are amazing technical solutions out there, but why is that we continuously see all these breaches? Because there are no policies that from a governance perspective that look at it. Education is not aimed at the right people, it's towards the tech people, but the tech people already know somewhat what's happening. It's 95% of the organization that doesn't know, and they're the everyday user that's connecting to either clients or to the value chain. And the value chain, that is your weakest link. You need to ensure that they are also educated, they have insurance protocols in place. So you can't just look at cybersecurity from a one-sided perspective. I think that's what I've learned, and I continue to learn. I'm always studying and learning, and I really had to focus on thought leadership opportunities, which actually I was lucky enough, I got to speak at the World Economic Forum on Cyber Panel. I represented Canada at the G20 Youth Summit. I've traveled with the Prime Minister as a cybersecurity small company next to BlackBerry, which enabled us to partner with them later on. And we're excited. We're partnered with Red Hat and IBM globally now. So clearly we're doing something right. And I think the most important thing is, as Sandra had mentioned, 5G is ubiquitous now. So it's no longer something that we're thinking it's going to happen. And with all these IoT devices getting connected, I think by 2023, there are going to be 3 times more IoT devices that are connected than the actual population of this globe. So, which is huge. And guess what? They're not all cyber compliant. So you're not going to be able to fill just purely technical people. You need to look at people from arts, from law, from different backgrounds who may be able to help and bring in that different perspective when addressing those cybersecurity governance issues.
It is evident that the ecosystem is growing, is expanding, is also very exhaustive. So I think one aspect in terms of, especially what you were talking about in terms of governance and truly understanding going beyond education, it's so important for anyone that is considering the whole journey of cybersecurity, because it's evolving. The velocity of changes is incredible. Claudette, could you share the narrative of your journey? And if you have any, how you address some of the roadblocks? Because Sandra is talking about hackers have a complete diversity, right?
Yes.
So share with us your journey.
Yeah, happy to. I've been in the game so long that when I started, it was just called IT. And so we didn't carve things out and say, this is security, this is infrastructure, this is networking, it was just IT. And so you did it all. So whether it was identity and access management, some form of intel, some form of working on the engineering team, I played a role. I would say that over my years in infrastructure, doing things like mobile security, rolling out collaboration tools, running, the enterprise kind of email system, everything you do, security has to be built in. So we've seen that shift left where it can't be the bolt on, like I've got the big project, we're going to launch date. Oh yeah, what about the security? That doesn't work. Security by design is where everybody needs to be. And so I find myself to be not only a technology advocate and a security advocate, but a business advocate. This is business risk. Everybody top down has to embrace the importance of getting security right, making sure that they're educated and it's in the design, it's in the development, and you've got it in all stages of the life cycle. For me, my big pivot, I will say, happened in the mobile space and making sure that we were secure. The role that I play now at TD is around the fusion center, bringing together that intelligence, bringing together the pieces on whether it's fraud or insider or AML or cyber, and triangulating. So the role of data, the role of artificial intelligence, the role of machine learning, that's that missing link that once you get it, everything comes together. So I love that collaborative piece of what we do. And also that there's no one owner, in the sense that you are working as partners and you're working together to solve these big, hairy, audacious challenges that we have. Because at the end of the day, again, back to those threat actors, they don't go, hey, we're gonna infiltrate, this one part of the organization. You see them moving laterally, you see what they're looking to do, and you're learning through those exercises. So you have to share it with all of your partners in what I call capital P protect. Cyber is, I think, one element of protection. You got to have a broader view, and again, connect it to business risk. So your question to me on, challenges that I've had, I have the joy of working with some amazing people. And so there's certainly been days, I think my challenges are more related to systems and threats than they are to individuals. And so I think also making sure that you're surrounded by the right type of people who get it and they're focused on the mission. I've got these exceptional team members who are, what's the mission? Commander intent. What are we doing here? Let's stay focused. And that's I think at the meat of everything we do. There's going to be a day, there's going to be a person who doesn't think you're the right one. That's okay. I like my work to speak for me, and just keep delivering value. Can't go wrong.
What a great segue to the next question. Let's get back to talking about sharing from your perspective from TD. What are some of the big ideas you're working on? And if you could touch on through the lens of increasing women participation, share with us in terms of all these incredible initiatives. I've heard of a few, but I know you have a whole closet full of other activities. So do share with us.
Yeah, I think I heard Sandra touch on it earlier, and maybe Sem too. Like, everybody is, gone from dipping a toe in the cloud to just like, we're diving in, right? So a lot of organizations are looking at the cloud opportunity and what that gives you from an agility standpoint, what that gives you from a speed and compute perspective. So I think that's very real for our organization and others. Again, I touched on data and analytics and understanding how that could be such a key enabler and accelerator for you running your organization. Tons of stuff on crypto. If you think about secrets management, keys, certificates, and the fact that we've got everybody remote, we have to get this identity and keys and certificates thing locked down. So, we've just announced our Center of Excellence around cryptography, which is an area that I'm accountable for, and just have amazing leaders. So how do you get more women in this space? I think, first of all, the value prop is solving problems, organizing things, finding the weakness and being the strength. Many fires are burning. I think we have something in our DNA where we like to run to that fire and solve it and get to the root cause and prevent it from happening again. So I think it's less about, marketing or trying to engage like, this technical thing. It's about problem solving. And if you've got curious people, you can train them to be successful in this space, but we have people who are brilliant. And so this whole notion that women can't be technical is ridiculous and we should throw it away immediately. I think we have to let people know what are all the roles in cybersecurity. Are you on watch? Are you in intel? Are you crypto? Are you in vulnerability? Are you an ethical hacker? Are you pen testing? There's so many different roles. There's not a role called cyber. There's an industry and there's many multiple layers of roles. So let's get that out there. So part of what we're doing is sharing. We've opened up something called the C-suite. If you go to global C-suite on any of the social channels, every day we're giving a tidbit. We're highlighting the types of jobs. We're highlighting the types of opportunities. We're sharing, the words and getting more people familiar with what it means to be in this cyberspace. So education and casting a wide and broad net so that you don't leave anybody out. That's kind of where we're focusing on at TD.
Claudette, let's look at statistics. How many jobs how many open recs do you have?
I have over 50 open recs right now. 50 open recs, whether in my Fusion Center, Intel team, vulnerability team. We're looking for a AVP of data and analytics. So listen, if you're out there, you've got the skill, I'd love to speak to you. Absolutely love to speak to you.
This is fantastic. Sandra, Fortinet, big ideas.
Well, I'm personally very proud of all of the efforts that Fortinet is making in this space. I mean, we're taking this extremely seriously and we're coming at this issue from multiple fronts. So At the beginning of COVID, we made all of our cybersecurity training free to the public at large. And we were so encouraged by the number. We had over 800,000 registrations, which really underscores the demand. And the response was so successful, we actually recently announced we were extending that free training through 2021. I also mentioned some of the partnerships that we have. We're working with the World Economic Forum on this issue. We have made our training available on Salesforce platform, IBM's platform. So we're working with Accenture. So we're really expanding, the availability of training curriculum. I think one of the great things about cybersecurity, and I mentioned earlier, it's constantly changing. And so it's one of the industries where continuous learning and training is just imperative. And some of the things that we're seeing are more women are coming into the industry, but they're actually coming in more qualified than their male counterparts. Because women really focus on credentials, and credentials are highly respected in cybersecurity. So we're providing our training. We're also, I think another huge issue is that a lot of people, women included, are not aware of how to get into cybersecurity, how to get into these roles. I see it all the time. And so we have been creating what we call pathways, cybersecurity pathways, where we're outlining the journey to different types of roles and the training you need, the credentials you need. And again, we've had a big response to those. But we're also out there educating and learning. My youngest daughter, poor thing, she's been since she was been growing up, I've been like, she was always strong at math, and I've been, pushing her STEM. And now it's cybersecurity. And she's really tired of it. And it's funny because, I watch her, and she went into, she's a freshman studying computer science. And she came in crying a few months ago that she said, my coding exam, I had a bug, I couldn't fix it. I failed, I was not meant to be in this. And this is the kind of thing, I truly believe that generally male students and counterparts are just more confident about this stuff, and women are much harder on themselves. And so I really think mentoring, highlighting, we're doing a lot of, as part of our campaign, we're doing a lot of work around having women talk about their careers, how they got their successes, creating more role models. But generally, even in my personal life, I'm constantly telling my daughter, her friends, other women about the opportunity in cybersecurity, because they're endless. And there's only goodness for bringing more women into the industry. The last thing I will say, we also have a veterans program, and that's been a great program for bringing more diversity into the industry. And for us, we not only provide training, but we also do resume building, coaching for interview skills. And then we also map those candidates down to our partners and customers to get them jobs. So I just think this is an issue that has to be attacked on multiple fronts, and we all have to be getting behind it and being really committed to changing it.
Great, fantastic. We have 7 more minutes. So Sam, I'm going to switch gear to the next question. And really to provide practical tools and tips for everyone that has logged in and registered for this event. What are the tips and tools from your perspective that individuals need to really focus on to have success in cybersecurity, both men and women? So even though we're celebrating International Women's Week, we realize that half of our participants are men. So we want to make sure that we also provide that particular perspective in terms of the tools and tips to have successful careers in cyber. So Sam, your perspective.
So what we've been doing as a company, even though we're small, we take in a lot of co-op students or internships. We mentor them in terms of cybersecurity for interviews, for what to what to look at in terms of career paths. Don't, you know, just stick to being a, I guess, a technical person, because you're going to, you know, you can limit your, it's like a glass ceiling that you're putting a limit on yourself. Continuously learn, because cybersecurity is, as Claudette had mentioned and Sandra had mentioned, you're constantly dealing with amazingly smart, you know, people who are breaching everyone, and they're continuously changing. So you have to constantly have this growth mindset where you're always absorbing. Get yourself a mentor. You know, go talk to different people in the industry, volunteer, write blogs, get yourself out there, because that's what's going to set you aside from many other people. Because due to COVID, unfortunately, a lot of people have lost their jobs. So you're getting people with like 10, 15 years of experience in cyber who may be looking for jobs, or who've switched from IT to cybersecurity, who are looking for jobs. So you're competing with those folks, so you need to stand aside. We actually offer online cybersecurity education training, and that's being offered through the California International Trade Center, so which is really great for anyone who's going onto an e-commerce platform. As well, we're working with the New York Academy of Sciences to offer training not only for postgraduate students and those who are looking at a second career, but actually the primary kids right through to grade 12, because these are the stepping stones for whether someone's going to go into cybersecurity or not. As well, we offer cybersecurity training through HIMSS, in Canada, it's being offered through 25 academic institutions, and there are plenty of finance sector, healthcare sector folks who are all taking these courses. And you don't, again, have to have a technical background. So cyber shouldn't be something you're like, oh no, I'm scared, I don't want to look at it. So it should be something that should be democratized, that you should be able to communicate and collaborate. And we also work closely with Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. We do a lot of presentations for a lot of chambers of commerce throughout the US, and also in Canada as well, and also in Europe. So it's really important to just get yourself out there, educate, be part of those groups, industry, government working groups, even though you're still in school, because that's how you're going to network with the Sandras of the world or the Claudettes of the world, you know, because then you'll be like, hey, they have positions, this person's really smart, and they're not just book smart, because you need someone who actually thinks outside of the box. So that's really important. So I think there's great opportunities regardless of gender, regardless of race or ethnicity. So we definitely need to get out there and pump that info out.
Fantastic. And Sam, I know you have to drop off at 1:50, so thank you in advance.
You're welcome.
I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. So
Perfect.
Sandra,
Thank
tips. We're going to wrap up in 2 minutes. So we'll have 1 minute for Sandra and Claudette, and we'll wrap up. In terms of tips to have success in cyber careers.
So I think really, you know, focus on educating yourself about the opportunities. I think networking and meeting with other cybersecurity professionals. I think taking advantage of the continuous learning and availability of tools out there. A lot of different cybersecurity vendors are offering curriculum and training. There's just a ton of learning out there. So really focusing on that, and just really getting what I think the big thing is just getting into the industry and understanding that there's so many different paths into it. And once you're in there, there's just tons of opportunity for, you know, a really fulfilling career that is both fulfilling, but also having an impact for the world at large. So yeah, I think mentorship, continuous education, and just really getting out there and understanding the opportunities.
Great. Claudette, 1 minute for you. Talk about Chachpa.
Sorry, 3 tips? Is that you want some tips?
Yeah, some tips, especially from you. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Three things I would say. First of all, shoot your shot. Don't think you can't do it. And, muster up that confidence to say, I'm going to go for it. And maybe I'm going to aim for here and I'll go here. But if you don't aim at all, you won't hit anything. So shoot your shot. There's a famous line from a movie, ABC, always be closing. I'm changing that to ABL, always be learning. Always be learning. Because you know what? Just when you think you've got everything down, something new comes out and you got to keep learning. So I'm always in a course, listening to podcasts on Coursera, listening to what's happening in the industry, because you can't lose that. And then the other thing is really, from a human perspective, tap into what is holding you back. And a lot of times it's fear. So I ask everybody to reframe that word fear. And so instead of saying it's like, forget everything and run, you take that F, the E, the A, the R, and you say face everything and rise. We can do it. We can do it.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. This has been such an insightful 40 minutes and it went by so fast. A key point in terms of some of the key items is pivot, velocity, different abbreviation of words now that we're going to share. But more importantly, thank you so very much for your perspective. And this is such a fantastic panel, really to highlight not just in terms of challenges, but also opportunities when it comes to cybersecurity. And all three of you, Sam, Sandra, and Claudette, is a great role model for cybersecurity and also strong leadership. With that in mind, I'm going to hand it over to my dear friend Sonia from Invest Ottawa, who is going to now bring it down to very much action-based from an HR perspective. So Sandra, over to you. Thank you, Claudette, Sandra, and Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sonia, you're mute.
The tagline of 2020, my sincere apologies. Claudette, I'm so inspired by your closing remarks. Always be learning and together we rise. We actually have a team that is assembling all the gems and knowledge that our experts are imparting with us today. And we are going to share that with our audience and promote it broadly, because the inspiration that is coming out of this session is immense. And we want to ensure as many people as possible have the opportunity to benefit. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Sophia. 4 million is a significant gap in any industry, and this is the reality facing the cybersecurity sector, as you have just heard. Given the exponential growth of technology, this significant gap creates significant risk to our economic prosperity, competitiveness, and security. We are going to get very action-oriented now, and we look forward to addressing these big picture challenges and seeking solutions with cybersecurity leaders from across our region and throughout North America in the next 40 minutes. Our goal is to provide you with inspiration and actionable insight to help you create and take concrete opportunities and ideas and translate them into action as individuals, organizations, and communities to help our world address this gap, and to build a rich, diverse, and inclusive pipeline of top cyber talent that benefits our global economy, industry, and community. And it is my honor to introduce to you the three esteemed panelists that are coming with us today to stimulate this dialogue and share with you all of their lessons learned, expertise, and experience. Mari Galloway, who joins us from Las Vegas, Customer Success Architect, Cortex by Palo Alto Networks. She is also the CEO and founding member of the Women's Society in Cyber Jitsu. We have Beth Claire, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer for Entrust, coming to us from Minneapolis. And we have Carolyn Robb, Chief Product Officer here in Ottawa for Corsa, a networking and security expert we've certainly have the privilege of working with on a very regular basis, given that she's here in Canada's capital. Welcome to all panelists. Thank you so much for being with us today. We have big picture challenges to address with you, and we are so excited to hear from you on the opportunities and actions you're taking with organizations and communities. But first, there is really a long-standing issue with respect to attracting more women in tech, and specifically into cyber. Let's open up with why you believe this challenge still exists, the perceptions and all of the reasons that you're coming across in your communities as to why more women aren't entering this field. Mari, I'd love to start with you.
From what I've seen in our community in the United States is They just don't know, right? They know they want to do something different. They want to do something great, but they don't know how to do it. And everybody's not giving them the opportunity to do it, right? So with all of these jobs that are open, it's like we have a whole membership group of women that could do the roles that are open, but companies aren't hiring them. And so that's a part of the problem. And I always say talk is cheap, right? You got to put actions to it. So every company that says we're about diversity, we're about, you know, bringing more women in, more this, that, and the third, they actually have to put action to it. And I think once that starts to happen, we'll start to see more women and minorities in those positions, in these spaces at the C level, you know, not just at the technical on the ground, but at the higher levels too.
Can't wait to dig into that C-level challenge, because there is a significant gap, certainly here in Canada, and I know that exists right around the world. Beth, you're in charge of HR for 2,500 across, one of the leaders in cybersecurity with Entrust. Talk to me about what you're seeing on the ground with respect to some of the challenges of attracting more women into the roles that you have available at Entrust and across your community.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm so inspired by the speakers from the earlier conversation. I tell you, I loved what Claudette said about, you know, just getting out there and making sure that people understand the jobs that are available to them and take your shot, and just so motivating every time I get together with women in leadership. It's such a great experience to bounce off each other. And you know what we're seeing, we aren't seeing that pipeline. We're trying very hard to find that pipeline, and we want to for sure look at it and look at our processes and how we can do that better. But at the same time, I think it is about growing that pipeline and making sure that girls and women are active in STEM and in cybersecurity from little on, and just really having those conversations. I think it was Sandra that said that, you know, she was speaking to her daughters since they were little. I've done the same with my daughters. I'm so proud of them and where they are in their careers. But not every, you know, girl, woman has that type of a mentor or some type of, you know, somebody in their life, an ally that can help expose them to those different jobs in security and really pique their interest and have them learn more. So I'm excited to hear from Mari and others here too about some of the things that they're doing with high school kids and younger girls to really get that pipeline growing.
We are going to tackle all of that action. I can't wait to share all of that knowledge and hope to inspire many others to take up some of those actions themselves. Carolyn, you're here with us in Ottawa with Corsa. I know that you're a big champion for women in tech and women in STEM. Chat with me about some of the challenges you're seeing from your vantage point.
Yeah, I think, and this is kind of a funny thing for me to say as a trained engineer and a cybersecurity tech head, but I think when we're talking about attracting people and it's all diversity and inclusion, that there is an element in there of feeling, like people have to feel that they belong. You know, you can have a diverse workforce and you can have culturally a culture of inclusion, but you have to wrap it all together with this feeling that you belong. And that's when your productivity and your creativity and everything gets going, and that diversity really pays off and your business metrics show it. But feeling isn't really what's discussed around a cybersecurity huddle. You know, it's sort of the element of diverse workforces and teams and an element of inclusion that doesn't get talked about because it doesn't seem to fit. And I think that is absolutely something that people look to when they're considering an opportunity or where they want to be. They look at it with that question, will I fit in? Will I belong? Will it feel right? And so that's one of the challenges that I think does get kind of swept aside because it isn't really a business statement or a technical statement. It's in that sort of fuzzy area. And then I think the other one that I see being a challenge that remains today is the network topic. And I'm in a network security space. I don't mean, you know, our internet and that network. I mean the networks that are those human connections that you establish over time, that take a long time to build up. And they're super important part. And I think that when we talk cyber, those networks aren't really there yet. They're still pretty traditional and monochrome. And so that would be another place that I think we have a bit of a speed bump that's causing a slowdown of progress, is just that whole network topic.
I would love to dive into that, the culture of belonging. And you've all touched on it actually in unique ways. And in the spirit of sharing ideas and actions that perhaps some of our audience members could take, perhaps you could each describe how you or those that you're collaborating closely with are working to create that culture of belonging. It's a huge task. It is definitely a journey, certainly for Invest Ottawa on so many fronts. What actions have you seen or ideas that are building that culture of belonging to attract more women? And Mari, I know that you, because of the role you play with the Women's Society and Cyber Jitsu, that you're working at this in a really deep way throughout multiple levels of education and different age ranges. Maybe we can start with you.
Of course. So the one thing that we try to do over at Cyber Jitsu is make it feel like a community, right? I may be the lead of the organization, but when I have volunteers come in, I always let them tell me their ideas, right? And I always let them tell me how they're going to work through their ideas, and we work through those things together. So when they come and volunteer with us, I want them to feel like they're a part of the team. They have, you know, a vested interest in what it is we're putting on, what we're doing for the membership, for the community. And we do the same thing with all of our members too. You know, I want them to feel like they have a say-so in the development and the growth of the organization. And that's something that I've noticed in my company now with Palo Alto. There's a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of, you know, communications around what ideas do you have? How can we implement this? How do we do these things? And I think giving the people a place to, you know, women, minorities, whatever, giving them a place to be themselves and to be a little bit vulnerable without the fear of a repercussion or anything like that goes a long way and helps them feel like they're a part of the team and like they can contribute and their ideas are heard versus, you know, stolen or overshadowed or anything like that. You have to give people the opportunity to deliver what they need to deliver.
And a safe place. It sounds like you're creating a very safe space for them. Make mistakes, you can stumble, we'll pick you back up, and there's an ecosystem. I love that. I just love that. Beth, I know that you are taking many steps within Entrust on this front as well.
Yes, we are. And you know, that sense of belonging, I absolutely agree, Carolyn, such an important thing. And we really believe that if people can be authentic and be their authentic selves, they actually can do better work. So that comes, I think, all the way from the leadership, buying into this whole really championship and mentorship. And, you know, we're very proud of our leaders really supporting our DE&I efforts. And, you know, we've done surveys with our colleagues, with their employees, and, you know, we'll get surveys back and they're, you know, 79% of our employees believe that our executives are champion. Well, I want 100%. You know, I'm not going to settle. I mean, and it's great. I mean, we look at Gardner's surveys and they say, you know, most companies, what they're seeing, the benchmark is 59%. Well, that is absolutely not acceptable for our entire global community, obviously. So what do we need to do? And some of the steps that we've taken have been really exciting and they worked for our company. And it's around building employee resource groups. So we've launched 4 different additional, we call them alliances in our organization this year. And we really encourage everyone to join every alliance that they feel passionate about. So we have a lot of crossover and we work together. And they get very active. We get them active in interviewing. We get them active in our policies. What are we doing differently? And really challenging everything that we're doing so that people do feel like they can be their authentic selves when they come to work and they feel supported. They feel like they belong. I just think it's just so important. So those are a few things that have worked for our company.
Amazing. So much leadership and role models, it sounds like, that you're grooming right from within Entrust, which is fantastic. Carolyn, I know the course is also committed to diversity and inclusion. Chat with us perhaps about some of the steps you're taking to create a culture of belonging and build that pipeline of women leaders in cyber. Oh, and I think you're on mute, Carolyn, just like I was. We're in good company.
Thank you. We don't have the head count that Entrust or Palo Alto Networks would have. And so for Corsa, it's definitely a cultural thing where one of the things that I am very adamant about is encouraging the encouragers. And that is something that, you know, when you have people who are fine examples of attitudes and approaches and inclusion that you know, I won't stand them up in a room, but it's definitely, those are the people that are starting to build the base of your pyramid of change. And so that's very much something that I spend a lot of time making sure that when people show those, show that positive attitude to diversity, inclusion, to creativity, that there's a feedback loop to let them know, hey, you know, maybe it comes naturally to you. I want to just say that what you've done is something special, and keep doing it, because that kind of cultural approach or shift, that's how we can affect change in our company. So that's one of the things we're doing.
Excellent. You are all such outstanding leaders and strong women in tech. The role model concept, that if you can see her, you can be her, I think that is incredibly powerful. And so certainly you all serve as role models. Who has served as your role model to bring you to where you are today? Why did you get started in tech? What propelled you forward? I know that there will be much inspiration for our audience to hear from each of you on this. Why don't we circle back to Carolyn and we'll roll back through Beth and Mari.
Yeah, I always wanted to be a product person in tech since I was quite young. Through high school, I had a fantastic set of teachers. And I would say that was a huge influence. I also think, I don't know the statistics, but of all of my friend pack, my father was an engineer, I'm an engineer. There's definitely a correlation there. But, you know, family-wise, also very encouraging. And then there were programs in place, and that was in the school system. It made a difference for me that I had that encouragement, and some fantastic early managers in my career who really, really promoted me to myself to let me know that, yes, I could do this. That I think there was some conversations this week about the imposter syndrome, that when you really don't see other people like you out there, you start to wonder if maybe you really don't, you're not right. And I had some very good support. So that was it. High school mentors, and then family and university.
That's a very powerful integrated ecosystem you've just described that touches on family, friends, the extracurricular, and all the education. I am such a firm believer in that, and you've just brought that entire point to bear in that story. It's amazing. Beth, how about you in terms of your path and entering the technology industry and specifically cyber?
Sure. Well, and I'm in human resources, but I've always found myself just intrigued with technology and working for technology companies. And you know, when I think of mentors and who's really influenced me in my life, there's just so many. There's so many. And I think you don't always know that you're being mentored in those really great organic relationships, you know, until after it's happening and these people shape your lives. So I really am such a strong proponent of be that person that helps shape other people's lives, even if they don't know it, even if you're not, you know, seeking to do something very structured, like being in a program. The programs are great, but I don't know about the rest of you, but probably the best career champions I've had in my life are probably not through some of the programs I've been lucky enough to be in. So, look for those opportunities everywhere. One thing I would say too, that we've tried, I'll just keep throwing out tips, things that I've tried, tips and tricks throughout my long-standing career, 20 plus HR, experience. But I would say, we did start a mentoring circle, which I really love that idea. It's kind of more of a non-traditional, one mentor mentoring, a student or something like that, which that's important as well. But this idea of mentoring circle where we're learning from each other. And, we have everyone in the groups are less than 10. We have everybody in the group assign a topic, that they'll bring. And this is in our Women's Alliance, actually, at Entrust. They'll bring a topic and then we'll have that discussion as a team. And you have all different levels of women and in this group. And it's just great to learn from each other, no matter what your position is.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And Mari, I know that you are exposed and have had such a diverse array of different types of expertise. I know that you've worked with the US government. You visited us here in Ottawa when you were part of a Canadian government event, which is fantastic. Tell us a little bit about your inspiration, your journey's fascinating.
So I actually got started, I was an architecture student. So building, floor plans and designing cities and things like that, because that's what I like to do. I like to build. I've got that Lego thing on this side behind me. That's a millennial fact, and I love that kind of stuff. So my journey wasn't necessarily tech per se, even though you use technology in the architecture space. And then I moved, and I didn't have a choice but to change degree programs, and that kind of spearheaded where I'm at now. And the things that I liked about that, it wasn't necessarily super technical, but it was more about strategic planning and understanding the business side of technology. And so those instructors that I had at Columbus State in Georgia were really good about helping you see the bigger picture of what it is you're trying to do. I actually got my first job with Accenture through my mom. She had just gotten on with them, and her recruiter was like, yeah, we're looking for IT people. I just finished my degree. And that's kind of how I got my foot in the door. I've had many of instructors that have said, you can do this thing or you can do this thing. I saw a guy show me a configuration from a router and a switch on the internet. And I was like, holy crap, I want to do security because that shouldn't be out there. Like, I shouldn't see any of this stuff. And so through, the different government agencies I've worked with, I've met so many people that have inspired me both in good ways and in bad ways, because inspiration comes from both sides. You're inspired by the good folks and you're inspired by the bad folks to not do the same things that they do. And so I've probably had more of the bad side to lead me to this point. And so Beth mentioning the mentor circles, we actually just launched with the nonprofit, we call them Cyber Small Tribes, and it's for women members that are business owners, right? Because I just became a business owner myself. And so we're able to discuss the trials and the tribulations and the struggles with running a business and working in cybersecurity and how to navigate that space. And finding that small group of people that you can bounce ideas off of is really helpful. Building an advisory team, as we call it sometimes, of different people that you're inspired by, that can help guide you when you have questions. And they can be your cheerleader, and they can be the person that says, hey, you're doing that wrong, don't do that, or you shouldn't do this or that. Having that team of folks is really helpful. And I have that with a number of people in my circle that I can tap into when I need to tap into them for advice, resources. It goes back to the networking piece. You got to have those people to help navigate.
I want to hover here for a moment because we've all touched on the fellowship, the networking, and the inspiration. How did you find your tribe? So I love that concept. That's definitely going into our report on ideas that have work. How did you find your network? How did you find that fellowship with those in your network?
I failed the CISSP. So, and I tell this story all the time, but yeah, I failed it by 4 points. And somebody said that I was working with, get in a study group. I was like, no, I don't like study groups. They're just kind of, I just like to study on my own. I just don't like them. And I did a search for women in cyber, CISSP, and I found Cyberjitsu. And that became the women there. Lisa Jiggets, the founder, she became one of those people. You know, she was like, hey, be on this board with me, do this with me. And I started to meet more folks. Gina Sharp, who's in the audience right now, these women became my tribe. Like, I know when I need to reach out, I can just reach out. And so they kind of found me. But once you find people you're comfortable with talking candid about or candid with, it makes it easier to figure out, okay, these people are a part of my tribe. And then join a nonprofit organization, you know, go and volunteer. That's another way to find, you know, people with like ideas that you can talk to and grow with.
Amazing. You know, you've touched on so many things that I'm looking forward to diving into with the entire panel. You talked about failing that exam, and we don't use the word failure here. We talk about learnings. It's always an opportunity to learn and apply those learnings. And so I think some of the greatest insight and actions that those on the call today can take away are not just the successes, but some of the stumbles and the failures, if we're going to call them that, or the learnings maybe that you've each experienced in terms of this particular area of focus, helping to build the pipeline, or examples of others that you've learned from where you've taken and drawn on something that you saw or experienced that either was something you knew you wanted to replicate, tweak, and adapt, or something that you definitely did not want to do and made sure you mitigated that risk. And Beth, I have to start with you because I know that in HR, there are many different strategies you're implementing. There will be things that work that you measure, and there will be learnings, as there is with all of us, where you know that you're adapting. Talk to us about some of the tactics and the actions that you've taken and learned from.
Well, and you know what, it's trial and error. It really is. And it's not a cookie cutter, one fits everything. But if you find a group of people with shared passion, I think, you know, you try some, you know, pretty amazing things, and then you continue to get feedback. We're pretty obsessive about getting feedback from our colleagues, our employees, we call our colleagues. And just, you know, tweaking as we go and reinventing what we're doing, reimagining what we're doing. So I think that's, you know, that's probably the biggest advice, is just keep trying, you know, some things. And then as you get traction, ask for feedback, and then shape it and mold it and listen, you know, sit back and be a leader that can actually listen to what people want. What do people value as part of your organization? And I think, you know, yes, you're going to try some things that, you know, maybe go flat. And, you know, in this world of this digital world today, it's pretty easy to understand, you know, how many people are participating in programs, you know, how many people are clicking on, you know, on this, how many people are, you know, joining the CMR site, how many people are in the alliances. You can have all this data to help you really guide you to what you need to do.
Excellent. Carolyn, I know that there are many different actions that you've taken as well, and some that I'm certain haven't succeeded, and others that really have, that you've adapted, or partners perhaps that you've worked with on this front. Share some of your experiences and learnings with us.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is when you asked what some of the existing challenges are, I mentioned the network topic, and this is exactly what we're talking about. And I mentioned it because I still find it a problem. And yet I'm sitting here learning some ideas how to sort of deal with what I always struggle with is, you know, that monochrome kind of traditional approach to a network. So I'm really liking what I'm hearing in that way. I would say some of the things that I'm trying to do differently, if that's part of the question you're asking, is also when we do talk about mentoring, I find it always has, and maybe, you know, again, it's from my perspective, that mentoring always seems to sort of be the overlord down to the newbie who's going to, you know, be the sponge and go forth. And I think that there is definitely room to kind of shift that and have newer people with their new perspective or their different perspective mentor the more senior or supposed wiser side. And I think that is something that I've been trying that has sometimes failed because people with more experience want to come in and push that out versus be part of the shift. And so that's one of the areas where I think for just making change, more diversity, getting more different people into our pipeline, this reverse mentoring approach is something that I would like to continue to build on, even though I haven't been totally successful at it so far.
Amazing. Always be learning, Claudette McGowan. We're going to use that quote, and it will weave through so many things we do through International Women's Week. Mari, you kicked us off on this topic by talking about that exam that you failed, and then you found this amazing tribe. I do believe everything happens for a reason. Are there any other observations or things that you've seen in your journey that have been really successful that our participants could learn from, and things that didn't work so well that you adapted that you'd like to impart with our audience?
So the mentorship part of it, I'm a big believer that, like you said, mentorship goes both ways. So I don't care how experienced I get, I don't care how many years I'm in the industry, I can always learn something from someone else. You know what I'm saying? So I have a mentor now, and I swear, I think she's probably my mentor, not the mentee. You know what I'm saying? But we're able to, it works because we're able to help each other figure out what our goals are, help each other figure out how do we get past this particular struggle. So one thing I would like to say to people is, if you're going to do a mentor-mentee relationship or any type of relationship like that, you can't go into it with, one-sided. I can't be the mentee going in and saying, you're only going to give me stuff and I'm not going to give you anything back, because that gets exhausting for people, and vice versa. So if you're going to be in those kind of relationships, you have to be willing to put in the work and actually do the job of being the mentor, the mentee, and work together. Where else? I try not to have many failures. That's probably, or many setbacks. Let me put that, there you go, setbacks. Because that scares me sometimes. I'm like, crap, how do I come back from this? But I'm sure I've had a bunch. CSSP was not the first certification that I failed. Won't be the last, I think just putting yourself out there and just going for it. Because if you, like you said, if you aren't successful, it's a lesson learned, and you use that energy and that lesson to move forward and try something different. No one's perfect.
This is a great launch point to so many of the themes we've talked about during International Women's Week, that women often count themselves out. They often believe they have to have every single skill set on a job description before they'll apply to Beth and say, I'm the ideal next cybersecurity leader for Entrust. And this really gets at some of the heart of the gaps that we face in what we have coined a leaky pipeline in terms of talent development when we look forward for that next generation. What recommendations or actions would you encourage employers to take to help address that leaky pipeline and engage and hire and retain more women to help close that 4 million person gap in terms of the cybersecurity sector? Beth, I've got to start with you as our HR leader on this.
They're happy to. Well, I probably would look at it from two different lenses, both, kind of that up and coming pipeline, but then our community, our colleagues that we have today, and how we can help them really, and get into the careers and continue their careers and retain them. So starting with, people that we're trying to attract, and people that are really learning. I think there's programs that you can do as an employer around volunteering, obviously, for STEM and different things that people have passion around to drive further education and experience for young girls and women, as an example. One of the things we've done is have a volunteer program that we support, that we basically pay the hours that you're volunteering. Every year we give a number of hours to each of our colleagues. We're also sponsoring high schools in our community. We have a security sponsorship for a high school, right at our headquarters in Shakopee, Minnesota. Not too many people have heard of that, but it's just south of the cities of Minneapolis. And, but internally, just to touch on that too, before, as we're getting people in the door, we have looked at all our hiring practices too, and we're going to continue to do that. Really reimagining, how do we attract diversity into, applying for positions? And, it starts by revamping your job descriptions. Are they, you know, are you targeting, in the words that you're saying, targeting, you know, certain groups, or, you know, are you truly, you know, able to get underrepresented groups to apply for your positions? So really thinking about the end in mind and how you're positioning that. But then once they're in the door, to really make sure that we're retaining our colleagues. I think it is really important that we continue to provide training. And we just started a program this last year that we're calling Security in Our DNA. And we launched 2 significant programs along with that. This year, we're going to launch another program that I'm excited about within that same Security in Our DNA. So we started out with just really basics, you know, and e-learning courses that we put together in basics and security that we continue to build upon. But those are for, you know, people that are maybe just starting out in the career, and how do they get more interested and see where they can actually grow their careers. We also have that second training that is really around our industry, and it's called the Industry Buzz, and we partner with our marketing team, and it's been very popular. We have a lot of discussions within our organization around what's happening in, you know, security space and in the news, and we have people from all different positions that will reply and get engaged in those conversations. So I think that's really strong way to go. This next one that I'm excited about is really around our certification programs. So, you know, that's something that we need to build out through this year, and it's something that we'll continue to build. It's not going to be something we do overnight, but that will help us. The alliances, again, that has just been a really strong way to grow and build awareness around careers and things that you can do to progress in the organization. So I could go on, but I will keep shifting it around. But you can tell I'm really passionate about it. The learning.
We could publish a whole volume based on those amazing ideas, but they're actionable. And so we wanted to provide actionable insight that people could take. And we recognize no one can take all of these brilliant ideas and implement them all at once, but it gives you a lot of fodder to look at a long-term strategy and building sustained action, which we're a big, big proponent of. Carolyn, recommendations for employers on how to help address that leaky pipeline that we are also concerned about?
Everything Beth said is exactly what organizationally has to happen. And then I look at it too, that there's the individual. So to add to what Beth said, I think there's an element of all of us being, as individuals, also complicit to this change. And I would say my biggest recommendation is to set your own diversity metrics, because change is affected both top down and bottom up. So yes, at a company or corporate level, there's absolutely going to be implementation of changes. And you may or may not be involved directly in it, but you will be hearing about it. But I also think there's something that you can do as yourself, and that is to set some of your own metrics, and they have to be, you know, something that you can measure your progress against. And so when you're hiring, you make it a requirement that the position gets filled by someone who brings diversity to the team. And it could be that you will know what that is. It's going to vary, but it's not just based on raw skills and a degree. It's a bit more than that. And I think it is tougher to add more requirements to a job search, but then change is never easy either. So the fact that you're sort of saying, yeah, I'm committed, I'm going to set my own diversity metric, and you know, I'm measuring me against it, then that metric actually builds in commitment. You know, I'm assuming you're a hiring manager. Well, you've got some responsibility, so now you have a commitment to broaden what you look at. And then, as with metrics, you measure, you look at yourself in a quarter or at the end of the year when we get introspective on ourselves, and you can see, you know, have you achieved what you wanted? Do you get the green happy face, or have you missed the mark and you know, you want to sharpen your pencil? But that would be my recommendation, is set your own, like, company's going to do stuff, but you, the individual, also should be setting your own diversity metrics.
I love that. And I know that Rita, who joined us for the opening of the session, is scribbling madly to take some of these ideas away as we're building out and evolving our diversity and inclusion strategy in Invest Ottawa. That is brilliant. Mari, you have such a collection of expertise, and you've worked with so many different types of employers and in different roles, government, public sector, private sector. What advice would you have? And then we're going to do one little wrap up with each panelist for final words.
So two things. One, if you're talking about, as an organization, diversity, bringing more women, more minorities in, partner with organizations that have those resources. You know, Women's Society Cyber Jitsu, WISP, WISAS, Black Girls Code, partner with those organizations and start building the relationship there, right? Because now you can start to see, okay, this is the pool of people we have. We can start pulling from these groups. And two, get out of your comfort zone. So we have these career fairs and we have these different outreach programs that companies will do, but where do they typically outreach? They're not going down to, you know, Southeast DC if you're from that part of the world and know that Southeast DC is not the safest place. They're not going there to tap into the talent that's there. So the folks in some of those areas may not have an idea that cybersecurity, technology, STEM is even an option because no one's going in there to talk to them about it. So we have to, as organizations, get out of that comfort zone and start to go into places we haven't gone to before. When I worked at the casino here at the Venetian, which is why I moved out to Vegas, we would have a career day, and the students from some of the schools that were predominantly, you know, Black and brown students would come and we would talk about cybersecurity. They had no clue. They knew about TikTok and YouTube and like, I want to be a YouTuber and I want to do this. They had no clue that there was a career in cybersecurity. So we have to take that extra step and go out there and say, hey, here's an opportunity for you guys, something to think about in the future. It definitely will help that pipeline.
Amazing. This has been such a rich dialogue. There is so much actionable insight that we are going to gather and publish. We are in a pandemic, and as we conclude this session, I'd love to hear from each of you for 1 minute on the most important takeaway you can share with our audience, champions, allies, partners, prospective cyber leaders in our audience today. What do you think is the most important takeaway as 1/4 of women think about leaving the workforce, scaling back their careers, to encourage them and to help all of us inspire and motivate others to stay in the workforce, to work in ways that perhaps we never have before to keep more women in tech moving towards that C-suite? Mari, I'm going to start with you.
The one takeaway I have, don't give up. Like I tell you, every other day I want to give up and like say, bump this, I'm tired, I'm done, and go lay on the beach somewhere. But our voices are needed. Our experiences are, you know, I don't have kids, but people that have kids, their experiences are needed because they have a different mindset when it comes to projects and, you know, making things grow and developing, you know, different avenues of an organization. So for those ladies that are out there, for the minorities that are out there, don't give up because your voice is important. Your story is important. That's something I had to learn because you never know who you're going to inspire by your story. So that's what I give.
Amazing. Beth, how about you?
Thank you. So amazingly enough, you know, we are seeing it, how COVID has affected women in their careers. We're seeing it on their applicant flow. We're seeing it on many things, including people, especially women, asking for part-time, going part-time, and really reducing their careers. And I think the answer here really is around how do we support those women. You know, sadly, we're 4 to 5 times more likely in the US to hear women come towards us asking to reduce their careers. Statistics also that women specifically still spend 20 hours a week on average more than fathers in household duties and childcare. So how do we change? It's a systemic issue, obviously, that we need everyone in the boat. So I love what you said, Carolyn, like challenge yourself. What are my, you know, how do I challenge myself towards that? But for the women, the advice, you know, for those mothers, especially that are out there going through COVID with distance learning and all the things, the challenges on top of trying to invest in their careers, find those champions, find your tribe, you know, we're out here, we want to help you. I think there's, you know, I just get so inspired when I'm doing these types of interactions with women that really want to champion other women. And we have allies from our men and from everybody else too. So really find that connection, find someone to help champion you. That would be my biggest advice. There's one saying that I read recently from, it's a quote from Bo Young Lee, who's the chief diversity officer at Uber. And he said, you know, DE&I really needs to be something that every single employee at his company has a stake in. And I believe that's true for, you know, globally, everybody in the world needs to see this. And until we see what we're trying to solve, we're fighting the wrong battle here. So we really need, from a systemic standpoint, everyone to understand what the issues are and to help champion individuals that are in marginalized groups to get into security, to find their champions and to find their career path.
And find their tribe. I love it. I love it. That's excellent. Carolyn, you have the final word today for our panel. Your key takeaway.
Well, Mari and Beth, awesome. That's how for the women out there, that you need to believe in yourself. We all need to support it. I would say if you leave this pandemic without having made meaningful change in your life, you have probably missed the biggest opportunity of your life, because nothing needs to be the same as we exit this. And so where this whole session is talking about change, I would throw it out more as a challenge to everybody, is to say, you know, shame on you if you're not changing something, because the status quo is not the same anymore. And so that's the opportunity, I think, for all of us, is to join these tribes, you know, find a new network, do networking in a new way, set your own diversity metrics, all these new things. This is the opportunity of the pandemic. And so that's my final words.
It is an immense opportunity for leadership, and it was a privilege to work with all of you, all three leaders that are on my screen today. I can't wait until we can welcome you into our region in person on the other side of this pandemic safely. Thank you for all of your insight, for your inspiration today, and watch for our blog, for our shared learnings, taking all of your collective wisdom and sharing it very broadly with our community. Thank you so much. Sophia, I am honored to bring you back, and I know that you are going to be introducing us into the final segment of our program.
I am, but I can't start my video. So if someone could switch me on, that'll be wonderful. There we go. Thank you so much. What an insightful panel. Like Carolyn was talking about, we are in such a change in terms of an environment, but also a new normal. Change management is hard. So therefore, that mentorship, fellowship, it's so critical. The ability to get up when you're down is so critical. But, you know, always getting outside of your comfort zone and always learning. So with that in mind, we're going to shift over to learning. And I'm so pleased to invite Rob from Fortinet to the stage. Rob is with the Fortinet, as I mentioned. He's a VP of Training Institute. I've known Rob for quite some time. We're not going to date ourselves. He's an alumnus from University of Ottawa, specifically Telfer Executive MBA program, which is also my alma mater. And he's going to share with us, really from Fortinet, a training program. And at the end of the day, at the end of the session, he's also going to provide links to free resources. But just to set up Rob, we spoke all day, the last little while, talking about increased complexity because of digital transformation, and also the exponential impact of the fourth industrial revolution that comes with AI and machine learning. And that all increases risk for the cybersecurity. And also at the same time too, because of velocity, organizations really have to keep up, not only in terms of the changes, but more in terms of how do they make sure that their environment are secure. So they're constantly adjusting the security posture. So we're thrilled to have you, Rob, and thank you for providing your time. And you are going to run us through a learning program titling Mitigating Cyber Risk and Developing a Good Cybersecurity Posture. So I will invite you to the stage, and I'm going to hand it over to you. And again, thank you for joining us on this particular learning opportunity for all of our participants. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Sophia. So I will need to ask someone to give me the ability to share my screen again. Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Schott. As Sophia mentioned, I'm an alumnus of Ottawa U Telfer Executive MBA program. So I'm the VP of what we call the Fortinet NSC Training Institute. Fortinet, we have quite a large investment in training and education, and I'll be talking about some of that. Fortinet as an organization has been around for a while. We actually celebrated our 20th anniversary this year. And we have a pretty big footprint here in Ottawa. We have several hundred employees based in the Bell's Corners area. We have a couple of buildings there. And I've personally been in cybersecurity for about 20 plus years myself. And interesting to see folks on the call from Entrust, which is where I got my start in cybersecurity. I was at Entrust quite a few years ago. And I'd just like to say hello to Melania DeGama, who's on the call as well. She's our director of marketing for the NSC Training Institute. And I believe it was Fortinet or Entrust where she got her start in cybersecurity as well. So if you're not aware, you know, the city of Ottawa really is quite, you know, a center of excellence for cybersecurity. There's a lot of activity here in the city. So I am going to go ahead now and share my screen and launch a presentation. And just let me get things started here. So the presentation that I'm going to be going through today is a couple of topics from a larger presentation that we'll actually be doing with the University of Ottawa later on this month. But we're going to be talking about some tools for mitigating cyber risk and developing good cybersecurity posture. So I'm going to make a couple of assumptions here. I'm going to assume that not everyone here is necessarily in the cybersecurity industry, but one thing that is for sure is that we do all need to make sure that we're looking at mitigating cyber risk. It impacts all of us. And, you know, cybersecurity, it's not just the responsibility of the IT department or the security department or the CISO. Cybersecurity is really, truly everyone's responsibility in an organization. So it can get pretty, the discussions around cybersecurity can get pretty technical and pretty daunting pretty quickly, but they don't need to. And that's really what this discussion is going to be about today, is how we can start to talk about cybersecurity and in particular mitigating cyber risk without having to get into the techno speak and really get into the technical details and really create a common language across our organizations for managing and mitigating cyber risk and developing good cybersecurity posture. So I'm going to keep it to a couple of very specific topics. So you can see we're going to look at some frameworks for cyber risk mitigation, and we'll delve into the details of one of them in particular. There's a lot of different frameworks out there. I'm going to touch a little bit on some global initiatives for combating cybercrime. There's an awful lot of cross-border initiatives that go on. You'll find that from a cybersecurity perspective, there really aren't any borders involved in a lot of the activities and standards and so on and so forth. They cross borders and are quite global. And then the last point that we're going to talk about is building a cyber-aware workforce. And I'm going to provide you with some tools that you can take away at no cost. This is by no means as a sales pitch for Fortinet. Everything that I'm going to be talking about here in terms of tools that you can take away are tools that are completely free that you can use within your organizations. So this is the agenda that we're going to walk through, and I'll stay on time as close as I can, and hopefully have some good time for question and answers at the end. So to start off with then, frameworks for cyber risk mitigation. So what is a framework for cyber risk mitigation? So really what it is, it's a system of standards, guidelines, best practices, and so on that, that we can use to manage risk and try to map them to our security objectives internally, starting from a business perspective, and then use that to invest in the right areas and make sure that our business objectives are mapped to the technology projects that we have going on, and that we're funding things in the right area, and really creating that common language across our business folks and our technical folks and so on, so that we can all be speaking a similar language. So, we really want to develop policies, procedures, best practices, and so on. And one thing that's really important here is that we want to provide this common language across our entire organization, but also across our entire supply chain. And I'll come back and talk about that in a minute. You've heard a couple of folks refer to the SolarWinds attack that happened last year, and it has really brought the whole supply chain risk to the forefront. So I'll touch on that a little bit again a bit later on. So a lot of these frameworks that we're going to talk about can get very confusing. I'll bring up on the next screen here some examples. We're not going to go into all of these, obviously, but this is an example of some of the more common frameworks that are out there. And some of the confusion that I often hear is, I'll hear people talk about the Nist framework, and I'll often hear people talk about, we need to be compliant with Nist. And, this whole idea of being compliant with a framework is a little bit misguided, because these frameworks are not something that we necessarily use to become compliant. So we don't typically want to be compliant with Nist. Nist is a framework that we can look at to perhaps achieve compliance with some other regulation, but Nist itself is not the regulation. It's the framework that's going to help us to potentially become compliant with some other regulation that's either governmental or perhaps a requirement from the vendors that we're working with, and so on. So here's a couple that you may have heard of, or you certainly will hear of at some point in time if you're working in the cybersecurity area. So the first one at the top, Nist, the Nist Cybersecurity Framework. This is probably the most pervasive, most well-known. There's one here by the Government of Canada with baseline cybersecurity controls for small and medium organizations, which is from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, which is part of CSE. There's various ISO standards. So you can see here the 25,000, it's actually a series of standards around cybersecurity, and some others. I won't go into them all in detail. One here that, again, is quite common. You'll hear a lot of people refer to this MITRE attack as a framework. And that one can get people a little bit nervous because of the word attack in there. And this does get confused. And some people will think that MITRE attack is the name of actually an attack that's been perpetrated. But in fact, attack stands for adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. It's put out by an organization called MITRE, which is a government organization in the States. And this is a much more technical framework than the cybersecurity framework from Nist. As you can imagine by the name, there's adversarial tactics and techniques and so on. That does get a lot more technical and is really not something that we'd be delving into in an hour by any stretch. But the last bullet here is important. As I was putting together this list of what are the most common frameworks, I came across a website that was almost a little bit comical, where the title was this organization called Cyber Experts, and they were listing their top 23 most popular cybersecurity frameworks. And the reason I put that on there is, again, just to highlight that this can get pretty daunting because it's almost information overload. You don't need to know 23 cybersecurity frameworks. You need to know one to get you started and get you to again, deploy a common knowledge and a strategy within your organization. But the fact of the matter is there's so much activity happening in the cybersecurity world that there are a lot of frameworks and standards and so on. And it can be challenging to get through, to see the forest for the trees, as it were. So we're going to focus on one of these, and you might guess that we're going to look at the one from Government of Canada, which is from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, but you would be wrong. We're actually going to focus on the very first one on the list, which is the Nist Cybersecurity Framework. And the reason for that is that it is the most common, it is pervasive, and although it is a U.S. Nist is a U.S. organization, it doesn't matter. We really don't need to be concerned that it's not a Canadian framework or that it's a US framework, because it really has been adopted globally, and I'll talk a bit more about that. You can see kind of the evolution of how the Nist cybersecurity framework evolved through various executive orders and acts within the US, and then eventually it became this framework that, again, we'll look at it in a bit more detail in a few minutes. But again, looking at, let me just back up here, looking at some of the international angles of this, although it is a US framework, you can see from this slide that it is adopted globally. You can see the Ontario Energy Board has created their own reference from the Nist cybersecurity reference. If you look at the one that I mentioned previously from the Government of Canada, when you go in and you look at their framework, they do reference the Nist framework and talk about how the controls within that framework map to the Nist framework. So there really isn't an issue with us, looking at the Nist framework as kind of the standard. It is the gold standard. I did come across an infographic as well that I thought was interesting, and I know it's probably way too small for you to see, but the reason I put it up here is, as I was looking over this and trying to decide what standard should I pick to really focus on here, this is a bit of a flow chart that asks questions, are you this type of organization? Then this is the standard you should pick. Are you this type of organization? Well, this is the framework you should pick. Almost inevitably, you're going to land on one of these yellow boxes that says the Nist framework. So again, just makes sense for us to focus on this one. So the principles of the framework, again, this is not something that you need to be an engineer to really get a lot of value out of this. In fact, it's not designed as a technical framework. It is designed to provide, this common language across the organization. It can be adapted to a number of different industries, a number of different technologies, and so on. It's a risk-based framework. I'm just gonna leave it at that. You'll hear references to maturity-based frameworks, and there's various schools of thoughts out there as to one versus the other. And I think the industry is really starting to align more with risk-based frameworks as opposed to maturity-based. But I won't go into those details. There's a lot of international standards that have been taken into consideration in the building of this framework, there's the different working groups that have built out this standard go far beyond U.S. borders for sure. You can see here that the framework itself is composed of 3 different areas, those 3 different areas are what we call the implementation tiers. The core of the framework, which is essentially all of the different things that you need to look at and consider as you're developing a cybersecurity plan within your organization. And profiles really talks about your organization, what's right for your organization versus someone else. So to look at each of these components of the framework. And the first one here, we're looking at the various tiers. With these tiers, it really talks about, the organization and the organization's view on cybersecurity. And, if you look at these tiers going from kind of partial, these different layers or levels from partial up to adaptive, it really talks about, the idea of an increasing degree of rigor and sophistication as you go from tier 1 to tier 4. So it does almost imply maturity level, but again, technically speaking, it's not a maturity based framework for anyone that wants to, that is concerned about that. But the different horizontal areas that go across these different tiers. The first one is all about risk management process. And this talks about, as an organization, what is your risk management process today? So, the repeatability of dealing with cybersecurity risk management and so on. If it's, is this something that as a company you've looked at and thought about once and then set it aside? Or is it something that's an ongoing repeatable process? Or is this something that's really, something that you are continuing to evolve and adapt and so on? And again, going from, the most basic up to something that's really part of your culture of this risk management process. The next part of the tiers here is the integrated risk management program. A lot of the things that we talk about in cybersecurity and managing risk, it's no different than any other type of risk management in an organization. Certainly when you get to the technical levels, it's a lot different and there's a lot of specific technologies, but risk management in a lot of cases is risk management. So, the next thing we want to look at is, as an organization, is our cyber risk management integrated into our overall risk management process? And you can often answer those questions by looking at where cybersecurity is located within the hierarchy within an organization. So in a lot of cases, if cybersecurity reports into the IT department, that might inform you in one direction. If cybersecurity reports into your CFO, then it's quite likely that your cybersecurity risk management is going to be integrated into your overall enterprise risk management. So again, these are the sorts of things that you want to be talking about, and these are the types of things that the cybersecurity framework at this point will help guide you through these discussions on looking at, how are we positioned today from the perspective of cybersecurity. What level are we at these different, within these different areas around risk management, integrating it, and so on. And then finally, how integrated are you with external partners? So is your organization looking at cybersecurity and cyber risk in isolation? Or is this something that you are looking at as part of a larger initiative with your entire supply chain? And again, that is something that we're seeing, certainly as a cybersecurity vendor, we're seeing that become more and more critical, where vendors are requiring their suppliers to have cybersecurity risk plans in place, and that they're aligned with, across the supply chain, and they're not just looking at it in isolation. And this is one of the benefits that something like a Nist cybersecurity framework brings to the table in these sorts of cases, where, if we're looking at mitigating cyber risk across our entire supply chain, having this common language across multiple organizations, across multiple countries, really becomes very, very critical. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of adoption globally with these standards, as opposed to them being, regional in nature. So again, this is the starting point. This is where you're going to evaluate your organization in terms of, what is your level today? How are you looking at risk management overall? Is cybersecurity or is cyber risk management part of your overall risk management process? And are you looking at this in isolation for your own organization and managing your own risk? Or is this part of a larger, supply chain wide initiative? I'll give you an example. At Fortinet, we're a cybersecurity vendor. So, we understand cybersecurity, but we actually have vendors that we work with that require that we implement cybersecurity training for all of our employees across our organization. So intuitively, you might think, well, all of our employees must understand cybersecurity. We're a cybersecurity vendor. Well, we have a lot of people in administrative roles who aren't necessarily cybersecurity people. So, we need to adopt, those same sorts of programs that anyone else would. And yes, we're doing that because we're a cybersecurity company and we understand that's the right thing for us to do. But it's also our vendors and suppliers that are also mandating that we must do that if we want to do business with them. And that's becoming very, very common. The next part of the framework is the core of the framework. And this consists of a lot of breakdown from different functional areas to very detailed information. And really, this is where we start to look at understanding what we need to address. So the 5 functional areas you can see here from a very high level cybersecurity perspective and mitigating risk. We need to consider ourselves with identity, protection, detection. We need to be able to respond to events when they happen, and then we need to be able to recover from events. If we're implementing a cybersecurity plan, the plan generally is not going to be focused on protecting our organization so that we will never have a cyber attack. We need to accept the fact that we probably will get attacked at some point. And when that happens, how are we going to respond to it and how are we going to recover? That's just as important as the protect and detect phases here as well. So again, you can see we're following a bit of a hierarchy. We've got these 5 high-level functional areas that we need to address. And as we go down further and further, you'll see that we're still maintaining a very common language, a very high-level language, so that we can use the framework to have conversations with business people, with technical people, and so on across the organization. So again, we've got 5 functional areas, and within those 5 functional areas, it breaks down into various categories, 20 categories in total, and then those categories break down into 97 subcategories. And the subcategories are very outcome-driven subcategories. So, it's not, you can see there's very specific statements there that talk about what we should be doing in these different particular areas. So you can see some examples on the screen here. I won't read through them. Finally, you'll see as the last part here is informative references. So these informative references, if we look at, we've got business environment as one of the categories, and then that breaks down into subcategories. So the first one, as an example, an organization's role in supply chain is identified and communicated. So that's one of the things that we have to make sure that we're addressing. And then there's a number of references that will, then get much more technical and much more detailed, where our security teams can then start to look at, okay, well, how are we going to do that? How are we going to implement that? And that's where things start to get more technical and more involved. So you'll see a lot of different standards, and frameworks and so on are referenced that will then take us from the cybersecurity framework into much more detailed projects now at this point. One thing that I want to talk about here as well is, when you look at this, again, it can get daunting pretty quickly when we talk about 97 subcategories and so on. But the thing to realize here is, as we start to build out a cybersecurity plan, and we look at what our potential risk impact is, and just as importantly, what our risk exposure is, we will likely find that not all of these 97 subcategories apply to us. So, we need to go through this from a very business-oriented perspective around what are the areas that make sense for us, where we don't have exposure, we don't need to necessarily invest, or we don't need to invest as much. But at that level, when we're looking at the categories and subcategories, that's where it's very business-driven, and we're making the decisions around, where do we need to focus on cybersecurity and risk mitigation, and what are the areas where we really don't have any exposure, or the potential impact is very, very small, and we can set priorities. So we don't have to worry about launching 97 projects to address all of these 97 subcategories. As we were talking earlier with the different panels, there was a couple of areas that really came to mind for me, and so I thought I would highlight them here. So you can see the protect functional area. There's a couple: identity management and access control. So this is an example that really has become incredibly top of mind in the last year, with essentially almost every company moving to a work from home environment or a remote environment. And a couple of the panelists mentioned this as well. The whole idea of being able to manage access control, being able to manage identity and credentials and so on. So having keys all over the place and certificates and so on, this becomes very, very critical. Sandra mentioned that the network perimeter really doesn't exist anymore. We've now got millions of small perimeters all over the place. So how do we control access to those things? So this is an example of one of the areas in the framework that people are going to be spending a lot more time and probably investing a lot more area in this particular category and the subcategories that would come out of that. So from a business perspective, the framework really allows us to start then looking at that from a budgeting perspective, and really start to make sure that projects that we have going on and budget that we're allocating, if it's not mapping and rolling up to an area here that we've identified as high priority, then we need to question why we're doing it, and should we be reallocating funds. The other area right below it, awareness training. There's so much discussion on that with the panels around how critical is that we're not just focusing training on engineers and the technical cybersecurity folks, but we need to make sure that everyone is aware of cybersecurity. And we talked about that in a number of different contexts. The contexts are, we need to make sure that everyone that's sitting in front of a computer understands what phishing attacks are and social engineering and how to protect themselves from those sorts of things. That's everyone's responsibility now. But then there's also the awareness in terms of just people understanding what are the cybersecurity careers that are out there, and is my skill set transferable, and those sorts of things as well. So again, certainly from a cybersecurity risk perspective, awareness and training is again something that is in all likelihood becoming much more top of mind and is getting more investment nowadays. And then again, the supply chain risk management. I can tell you without a doubt that this is an area within most cybersecurity plans that has been reviewed very, very critically and very in depth with the recent attacks from last year. Many of you are familiar with the SolarWinds attack. If you're not familiar with the details, you've probably at least heard about it. And you may have heard about it in the context of a supply chain attack or supply chain cyber risk within the supply chain. And the connection there with why that SolarWinds attack is a supply chain risk. This doesn't necessarily mean that suddenly people that are in the supply chain business are at risk. What that means is our supply chains in general are at risk. So when we focus on cybersecurity, we can't focus on it in isolation. We need to be aware of what our suppliers are implementing with their cybersecurity risk plans, what our suppliers are doing, what our vendors are doing, what our customers are doing. So in the case of SolarWinds, and I won't go into detail here, SolarWinds has a product called Orion, and it's a network management monitoring tool that's used almost pervasively in the industry and is used by a lot of government organizations, a lot of very, very large organizations. And that software was hacked. And as organizations around the world were updating their versions of that software, the hack was then getting into their networks as well. So hence, it was the supply chain it was an organization in the supply chain that got attacked, and then that was used to infiltrate. In some estimates are up to 18,000 customers that had been impacted because of that. And again, if that's an area of interest for you, there's tons and tons of information out there on the attack, the theories of who is behind it and so on. I'm not going to get into that, but it's pretty obvious now where the attack came from. It's estimated that it was likely hundreds of engineers that were collaborating on that as a coordinated attack. So yeah, all that to just emphasize that the nature of a cyber risk plan does need to make sure that it encompasses our entire supply chain. So the last part of the framework is what we refer to as profiles. And a profile, this is really all about using the framework as an organization to really build out a plan to implement to address your cybersecurity priorities. It needs to obviously address the organizational needs, but it needs to address your supply chain partners as well. You need to understand what your organizational objectives are to be able to develop such a plan. You need to understand what the potential risk impact is. So if you are attacked, what is the impact? What's going to happen? And that's going to differ for the various types of assets and resources that you're trying to protect. If you're a healthcare organization, the risk impact is going to be very different to you than it would be for someone in a different industry. So you need to understand the impact, but then you also need to understand the exposure. If you have a network that's completely isolated, or what we refer to as an air-gapped network, well, your exposure is probably a lot different than someone whose whole business is on the internet. So again, understanding the impact, understanding the exposure, and then understanding the controls that you already have in place. All of those things come together to build this cybersecurity profile or plan that you can then put together and then use that as a way to start to have the conversations within your organization to put the plan into action. So, the idea of the plan is then something that, provides this common language, provides it across the entire organization, regardless of, the people we're talking to in terms of the field that they're in, their technical knowledge. It needs to be a common language that is accessible to people at the board level, at the executive level, but also be relevant to the technical folks as well, so that the technical folks can take the plan and implement the plan and put it into to proper process and controls and so on. Now, if we put the time and effort into doing this and we address it from a business perspective, which is really what we need to be doing, the technical folks, of course, are obviously extremely critical. Once we put the plan into action, things can get very technical, very quick, but we need to be driving this as a business requirement, not as a technical requirement. And in fact, we have a workshop at Fortinet that we do that's called, cybersecurity, an IT challenge or a boardroom priority. And it really is a boardroom priority. This is not a technical issue anymore that just lives in the IT department. So we really need to be driving this from a business perspective. And, this plan should be something that, our business folks can be looking at to set priority, identifying the gaps, allocating budget, looking at it in terms of year 1, year 2, and so on. If our risk exposure and impact is low, then there might be projects that we can move out to year 2. If there's areas where the impact is negligible, then we don't necessarily have to allocate a lot of budget to it. And then we can use this plan again to look at all the projects that are going on and allocate budget, as opposed to allocating projects that just seem like pet projects that might be too overly technical that we don't understand why we're doing them, if they don't map up to something that we've identified as high priority, and it's not something that we've been able to communicate through this plan, then we need to take a closer look at it. Yeah, and again, I don't need to really go over this again, but this slide is really just trying to emphasize again that the framework is really all about making sure that we're developing this plan, but we're doing it as part of our supply chain. And again, that might in some cases be because of your choice, but in a lot of cases, as we're seeing more and more, this is becoming a requirement for most companies, particularly in North America and in Europe. We're seeing that these plans are not something that's optional anymore. In some cases, it's government regulation. In other cases, it's having to comply with a standard because your suppliers and your buyers are mandating it. And again, having these common frameworks that can be understood and can be used to develop a common language across organizations, across countries, across technical versus business people, really become very, very critical. So I'm going to play a short video here. This is just 1 or 2 minutes long, and I'm hoping that my audio is actually going to get shared properly. So hopefully it goes through.
The cybersecurity framework in our mind has been so successful because it has very large, broad appeal to many organizations, small, medium businesses, large organizations.
It helps us communicate risk in ways that everyone understands, from the server room to the boardroom.
It provides companies with a common language. So whether you're a CEO or you just walked into a company the first time as a new employee, it's something that you can feasibly grasp.
One of the things that is so exciting is that this has moved out of being just a public policy conversation, and it is moving into being a business strategy conversation. So I find that really cool.
It talks a lot about how an entity should assess their risks and then apply the framework to their environment. It gives them a lot of flexibility. So it's not a one-size-fits-all model.
The fact that, you have this flexibility inside the framework is something that is really new in the context of, standards and similar things.
It cuts across all different segments, whether it's manufacturing, agriculture. It's a framework that can be used across many areas, many businesses, et cetera. So therefore, it's a very inclusive type of framework.
My belief is it's really the most comprehensive view of the full set of things you needed to do.
So yeah, just some validation there to just emphasize the fact that this is something that's been adopted globally and is pretty pervasive. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions before we move on to the next topic.
Rob, I'm wondering whether you could hear me.
I can, yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to try to get back on video. I don't have control of the video. One of the question is, there is absolute understanding that there needs to be a common language from really bottoms up and top down, just to make sure that there's most risks are being addressed, given the velocity of change, right? How portable or how agile are these frameworks?
Well, I think, the one thing that's important to understand here is these frameworks, they're frameworks that drive conversations, right? So as we work down the hierarchy, for example, it does get more and more detailed. So in the case of the Nist framework, for example, the core parts of it they certainly do change, but they don't change that much as you would think. But what does change quite often is, the references and the materials that can support, if there's new attacks and so on and so forth, there'll be a lot of references that can get added quickly. And the other thing that is quite nice, particularly about the Nist framework, is it's a document, but if you go to the Nist website, there's a living, breathing website around the Nist framework as well, with a variety of additional tools that can provide a lot of resources. So as things change, and you're right, it changes almost daily, the framework itself doesn't need to change, but a lot of the tools and resources that are on the Nist website to help you address these things, they can change quickly.
So it's very similar during our days at Nortel, where obviously we want to standardize a lot of practices from a development perspective, but fundamentally the framework remains the same. It's just that we address oncoming requirements as it comes. And I think it's a very similar approach.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's right. And I think what you find is with the categories and the subcategories, usually what happens is, rather than those change a lot, new subcategories will get added as opposed to the categories themselves actually changing. Because as we know, as adversaries get smarter and smarter, there's new attack vectors, there's new methodologies and so on. So it'll continue to grow.
Great. Given the fact that we're going to wrap up at 3:30, I'm going to let you finish.
Okay. So, we don't have a lot of time. All right. So going on then to the next slide, and this is now all about some of the global initiatives to combat cybercrime. And in fact, I am just going to talk about one of them, which is, I'm glad I decided to do that, and we only have a few minutes left, about 10 minutes. So, one initiative that is very top of mind, certainly for Fortinet and a lot of organizations, is the World Economic Forum. So a couple of years ago, there was the launch of the Global Center for Cybersecurity. And the reason for that is the World Economic Forum has actually identified cyber risk as one of the top 10 threats to the world economy. Coming out of that, the Global Center for Cybersecurity was developed. Fortinet is very, very involved. In fact, our CEO was one of the founding members. And there's different pillars here. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are kind of the pillars for the Center for Cybersecurity. But the one that's most relevant, certainly to me and my organization at Fortinet, is this idea of developing a global cybersecurity workforce. That resonates obviously very much with the NSE Training Institute, but Fortinet as a company as well, we're investing very, very heavily in training and education, and we've made a lot of changes of that in the last couple of years. So this developing of a global cybersecurity workforce, this objective from the Center for Cybersecurity, is actually, for all intents and purposes, our mission statement within the Fortinet NSE Training Institute. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing in this area. You can see here, building a cyber-aware workforce. Some quotes here. So Gartner Gartner looks at this area of information security awareness and training programs. And in fact, they have a market guide that talks about all the vendors that deal in this space and have these programs available. And Gartner says that 5% of organizations today have deployed cybersecurity awareness training programs, but they expect that to increase to 25% by 2024. And that's probably a low number given all the regulations that are coming out. And of course, the world has changed in the last year as well since this Gartner information came out. As part of this, well, I'll just skip this. As part of this, Nist has really rejuvenated another one of their standards, which is the Nist, well, it's not a standard, it's a publication 800-50. And this is all about how to build an information technology security and awareness training program. Now, if you can download this document, all of these Nist documents, by the way, are available free of charge. Nist documents are always free. So you can download this and it'll tell you about, training and awareness and education, designing a program, and so on and so forth. But what you'll find is it follows pretty traditional, project management philosophies and so on, but it's very specific on developing an awareness and training program within your organization. There will be a link sent out as part of the follow-up to this as well, where you'll be able to download that document, as well as the Nist Cybersecurity framework as well. One of the things I do want to touch on here, though, is there is very specific definitions around awareness versus training versus education within this Nist publication, as well as in various other types of programs and standards and so on to implement these programs. So at Fortinet, one of the things that we did was we developed a free service for the Fortinet Cybersecurity Awareness and Training Service, and we launched this back in September. This is a completely free service that we're making available to customers, partners, the general public, and all of you on this call. If this is something that you need and you can use within your organizations, you can quite easily sign up and have free access to everything that I'm about to show you here. But essentially, what we have is a package or a service offering that provides you with awareness assets, training, administration tools, and so on, so that you can make sure that everyone in your organization is getting the training and awareness that they need. So I'm just going to go through the parts and pieces of this program a little bit. You can see that first off, we have the awareness piece. And awareness is all about making sure that everyone in the organization is always thinking about cybersecurity. So this is a little bit different than training, where we're trying to make sure people understand the concepts. We want to also make sure that it's always top of mind. So you can see this catalog of awareness assets consists of high resolution posters that you can print out if we were going to our offices, screensavers, tip sheets, email banners, micro learning videos that are 30-second videos and so on. And then you can use those in your organization however you see fit to make sure that cybersecurity is always top of mind. One thing that you'll notice is we've tried to keep the Fortinet branding on these very unobtrusive. Because this is not about Fortinet, this is about understanding cybersecurity and awareness. So that's the awareness assets. Then there's the training pieces where we need to make sure people understand the concepts. So we have a set of lessons that really apply to anyone that's sitting in front of a computer screen. With additional role-based lessons that talk about things like, why cybersecurity matters to a CEO or a CIO or a CFO. So this is all hosted training. You don't need to host this internally. This is hosted on our learning management platform. And again, is content that's completely free of charge for people that want to deploy it internally. We also have a set of tools that you get as part of this service as well, which provides you with deployment guides, how to launch an awareness program internally, and a dashboard so that you can monitor the progress, which of course is very, very important. If you deploy a program like this, you want to make sure that it's being used and it's having an impact. So we provide you with getting started guides, administrator portals so that you can manage your users, dashboards to show progress, and so on. And again, that dashboard is very, very important here. And then the last piece is the education. So education is all about now making sure that we're actually training up the security professionals, the people that are actually in the cybersecurity as a full-time job. Now, with this free cybersecurity awareness and training service, that level of training is not part of it, because this is all about training and awareness for our entire organization. This is at the education level is much more technical, hands-on training. We have about 30 different courses that make up all this technical hands-on product training of how to implement solutions and so on. But what we did as part of our response to the COVID situation, and Sandra mentioned this earlier, is we made the decision to make that entire catalog of content available free of charge to the world. And that consists of, if you add it all up, it's about 9 weeks worth of technical hands-on training. And then the last thing I'll mention, and this is actually my last slide, is to help people understand what training they should be taking. We've also developed these education pathways based on the Nist Framework, which is the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. So these are pathways that help you understand how our training maps to the cybersecurity education pathways that have been published and are out there as standardized. So that's it. I know we're running out of time here. Links to all of these resources will be available to you as well as a follow-up. So I'm going to stop there because I know we're basically out of time.
Rob, this is fantastic, and really thank you for your services, and also at the same time providing these resources to our community, to all the participants. I know the fact that everyone's looking at learning, and then also the accessibility piece is key. Now, just a basic housekeeping question. I asked that with Claudette, and I forgot to mention it, ask Sandra, what is the number of open racks do you have from Fortinet?
So I'm not sure what the total number would be. I can tell you within my training organization alone, I have about 25 open recs just within the training department. So, you know, it would be in the hundreds.
Yeah, so this is a really good news stories, opportunities, and the fact that you're providing these resources for free to our community is incredible. And I want to thank you so very much. This brings us to the end. And I want to thank all the speakers. I also want to bring my tribe mate, Sonia, back into the screen. Thank you, Rob. We will connect very, very soon. It's unfortunate we don't have time for further questions, but we'll definitely send some questions for you in the event that there's critical ones that we need you to address. So Sonia, it's been a really, really, really good and insightful day. Fantastic panels with Claudette, Sam, and also with Sandra. And then your session in terms of HR with Mari, with Beth, and also with Carolyn. And my brother from different mothers, Rob, at the end from a training perspective. So I'm going to let you close off. And this has been such a great partnership with Invest Ottawa and University of Ottawa, Invest Ottawa and University of Ottawa. So I'm going to punt it back to you, tribe mate.
I am overwhelmed. So what an incredible set of resources, the value add, Rob, that you have just shared, and what is available to our community completely free of charge to help guide them in this journey. Every organization, no matter where you sit in the organization, needs to be taking action on this imperative. And you have now equipped everyone in our community with top tier resources from a leading firm that is here to help support them in their journey. I could not be more grateful. And you can trust that we will promote this presentation and all of those resources very broadly so that they are maximized, which is truly the entire goal and intention of International Women's Week. How do we equip, inspire, and provide actionable insight that all of you can put to work inside your organization every day to create more opportunity to achieve greater impact? It is a joy to collaborate with you always, Sophia. Thank you to all of the panelists, all of the speakers who brought their expertise and experience to bear, and for the great collaboration throughout, not just today, but International Women's Week more broadly. We will be sharing the outcomes from today's session. We will be communicating that through the University of Ottawa as well as Invest Ottawa to ensure that you can put all of these learnings to work in your sphere of influence. Thank you very, very much. I welcome all feedback. Sophia and I are available on LinkedIn, and we will be promoting today's session broadly. And of course, reach out to us if you have further questions for any of our panelists. Thank you all. Stay healthy and safe.
And we'll see everyone in the next event, which is coming up pretty soon.
We will. Wonderful.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.